Clean up or get out, black. The angry shout cut through the hospital hallway like a knife. A furious white doctor was pointing at a black janitor who was on her knees, quietly cleaning with a mop. No one said a word or even looked at her, but someone was watching. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who had once been a poor orphan raised by this very woman now being insulted. She had comforted him when he had nothing, and now, minutes later, the entire Delgado National Hospital would apologize for trying to shame her. This is a true story about racism, disrespect for hard work, and how sometimes the person you humiliate today is the same one who helped shape a nation's leader. It was 6:45 a.m. at Delgado Hospital, and the long hallway glowed under dim lights, the air smelling faintly of cleaning chemicals. Outside, early rain touched dusty windows, while inside, a woman in her 60s, wearing a worn janitor's uniform, was cleaning up after the night shift. Suddenly, a heavy-set white doctor in a bright white coat stormed in, her lips painted bright red. She looked at the wet floor sign, then the still wet floor, dragged her coat through a puddle, kicked the mop aside, and yelled, "What kind of walking is that? You think this is a dirty market? Go clean a bus station if that's your level." The older woman bowed her head and whispered, "I'm sorry, doctor." People walked past, ignoring her, while some young nurses laughed quietly. No one stood up for her. She picked up the caution sign and went back to cleaning. On a nearby bench, a black man in an old shirt sat silently, watching everything. He said nothing, but he was the president. He had watched everything unfold, his face calm but serious, his eyes full of deep thoughts, yet no one noticed him. A security guard walked by and muttered, "No sleeping here. If you're homeless, take it outside." The man didn't argue, he just gave a slow, respectful nod. What no one realized was that the woman being yelled at was the quiet foster mother of a once orphaned boy, and the man mistaken for a homeless person was none other than Ibrahim Traoré, the current president of Burkina Faso. He wasn't dressed in a military uniform that day, didn't have any bodyguards, no flashy car, and wore no sign of power, just a simple traditional shirt, dark trousers, and leather sandals. He had come to Delgado Hospital quietly, without warning, to see the truth that power often hides from view. As he entered the inpatient ward, the area known for the most complaints, a white nurse, about 30 years old, stood in his way. Her uniform was crisp, her hair tied tightly, and her eyes were cold. She raised her arms and said, "This area isn't open to visitors. If you don't have insurance or a referral, go back to the waiting zone. That's where people without coverage belong." She looked him up and down and asked, "Why are you here? Whose family are you with? Do you even have any documents?" Ibrahim didn't say a word. He just gave a soft smile, not angry, but the kind of smile that holds pain, the kind you give when this kind of thing happens too often but still hurts every time. In his heart, he heard the voice of his foster mother, Aminata. There are places where your skin enters before your name ever does. He quietly turned and walked a different path, deeper into the hospital. With every step, he was reminded of what was truly sick in that building, not the patients, but the hidden disease of discrimination. The hallway remained quiet, the lights dull, and the smell of cleaning chemicals heavy in the air, as the floor, recently mopped by the very woman who raised him, shone beneath his feet. Ibrahim turned a corner, his eyes still on the stained, peeling wall, when his foot suddenly slipped on a wet spot that hadn't dried. He nearly fell onto the cold stone floor, but at that exact moment, a trembling yet steady hand grabbed his arm and kept him upright. It was an older woman in a faded janitor's uniform, a scarf covering her hair, still holding a damp mop. She stammered with wide, panicked eyes, "I'm so sorry, I just finished cleaning, I didn't realize," but Ibrahim didn't. "Look at the floor." He looked at her, saw her bowed head, and froze as everything around him seemed to pause, the silver hair, the familiar voice, the gentle hand on his shoulder. All of it brought back memories of his childhood, nights of fever, thin bowls of rice porridge, lullabies in a soft voice, and with a hoarse whisper he asked, "What's your name?" The woman flinched, then slowly looked up with tired but kind eyes and replied, "Aminata, sir," and the name hit him like thunder, his heart tightening as childhood memories came rushing back. The name once stitched into an old cloth, the woman who held him when he cried for his mother, who turned a tiny hut into a safe place. he stepped back, eyes wide and hands slightly shaking, and said, "Aminata, is it really you?" She leaned in, eyes filling with tears, and softly whispered, "Ibrahima," like calling out to a long-lost dream, and at that moment all the titles, the power, the politics, the name Mr. President disappeared. There was only a boy who once called her Mama Nina and the woman who had protected him from hunger, pain, and loneliness, later, in the hospital cafeteria under pale lights, with trays of cold rice and tired workers waiting in line. President Ibrahim, still in his simple traditional clothes, walked quietly beside Aminata, the woman he had just found again after 30 years, and she spoke softly, "They don't let me eat at the same time as the doctors, but if I go early, they scold me for taking someone else's portion," and he looked at her with a calm face, though a storm was raging inside, and gently said, "From now on, Mama, you stand with me." They stood quietly in the cafeteria line, unnoticed by anyone, until two white doctors approached, one overweight, wearing thick glasses, who said loudly, "Janitors eat last. Don't mix with the technical staff." "And you, who are you? A patient's family? The charity food line is downstairs." Without waiting for a reply, they pushed Aminata's tray aside, spilling soup onto her shirt, and she stumbled, but Ibrahim caught her just in time. Nearby, a young medical student who had been live-streaming a hospital tour still had the camera rolling. Ibrahim stood up straight and looked at the two doctors, not with rage, but with a cold silence sharper than any scream, and said, "She's not an outsider. She's the woman who once saved a starving, abandoned child from death. That child was me." One of the doctors sneered, "And who exactly are you to give us a lecture? If you care that much about janitors, go mop floors with them." In response, Ibrahim calmly took out a handkerchief, gently wiped the soup from Aminata's shaking hand, then stepped forward, unbuttoned his coat, and revealed a small presidential insignia hidden inside the collar. The room fell completely still. "The man you just mocked in the charity line," someone whispered, "is the president of BurkinaFaso, and the woman you shoved aside is the one he chose to honor by kneeling for her." Later that afternoon, the main conference hall of Yalgado Hospital was packed. Doctors, nurses, administrators, and students gathered for a routine meeting, still unaware that the man in the plain cotton shirt now entering the room was the head of state. He walked to the podium, placed a hand on the mic, and said calmly, "Before we begin, I request security footage from the cafeteria, starting at 11:40 this morning." The technical staff hesitated, but a look from Ibrahim silenced them, and the screen lit up. There was Aminata in line, then the two doctors shoving her, their harsh words, Ibrahim's quiet response, and the insult, "If you're defending them, you must be fresh off the street." A nurse gasped, "Oh my God, it's him." Every eye turned to the podium, now lit up, where President Ibrahim Traoré stood. He slowly removed the small golden pin from his chest and said, "I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Republic of Burkina Faso." The room went silent. He continued, "I came here dressed like any other man, and within hours I was judged, insulted, and dismissed, not because of any medical reason, but because of the color of my skin. If this can happen to me, here in the capital, imagine what happens to the poor, those without titles, like the janitors." He turned toward Aminata, still standing at the back with hands damp from mopping, and added, "This woman raised me when I had no mother, no home, nothing but her kindness in a forgotten village. Today, you treat her like she's invisible, but it is she, and many like her, who carry the true dignity of this nation." The room remained in stunned silence. One doctor lowered his head in shame, an HR manager dropped a stack of files with trembling hands, and the young med student, still filming, whispered, "This isn't just a meeting anymore, this is a public trial." Less than 24 hours later, after President Ibrahim Traoré's powerful speech, the Ministry of Health launched an urgent, full-scale investigation into Yalgado Hospital, and the early findings caused nationwide outrage. The two doctors seen in the security footage were suspended indefinitely, while the head nurse of the emergency unit, who had stood by in silence during the discrimination, issued a formal public apology to the entire black community, posted on the ministry's official page, where she admitted, "I didn't directly insult anyone, but I stayed silent when I should have spoken up, and that silence is the worst thing I've ever done." Meanwhile, something extraordinary happened in Ouagadougou's Citizen Square. Aminata, the elderly janitor with rough, tired hands, stood on a stage in front of thousands of people and cameras, wearing a simple traditional outfit, her voice trembling with emotion as President Ibrahim honored her with a rare and meaningful title, Guardian of Dignity for the National Hospital, and said to the crowd, "We can rebuild the hospital, but we cannot heal its wounds unless we respect those who kept it clean. Not just with their hands, but with their dignity." In the front row, an old colleague of Aminata's, Fatou, a retired nurse, wept into her hands and confessed, "I saw her get splashed, shouted at, treated like she didn't exist, and I laughed it off because I was scared I'd be next. Today I just want to say I'm sorry for being the second black woman who didn't protect her." On social media, hashtags like #RespectForAminata and #NoMoreSilence exploded across the continent. Students pinned Aminata's photo in their classrooms. Young doctors wrote her name on their lab coats as a symbol of strength and resistance. And one medical university in Burkina Faso even added her story to its national ethics curriculum in a course titled Ethics in Medical Practice. At the presidential palace, there were no parades or fireworks, just a quiet, powerful moment as an elderly woman slowly walked up the stage past rows of students, doctors, officials, and everyday citizens. Aminata wore a deep indigo boubou with a simple shawl over her shoulders, and yet every step she took made the entire room rise to its feet, and President Ibrahim Traoré, holding the microphone, struggled to speak as emotion filled his voice. "I lost my mother when I was just 5 years old, and when I had no one to call family, it was Aminata who quietly wiped away my tears. So today, in front of the entire nation, it's time for this country to wipe hers." President Ibrahim then handed her an honorary national retirement certificate, signed by both the government and himself, followed by the deed to a small, fully furnished home in the heart of Ouagadougou, near a school and close to the very hospital where she had worked for nearly 30 years, and then he announced the launch of the Aminata Scholarship, created for children and students like him who grew up with nothing but potential, saying, "No one is born nameless. It's just that society forgets to say their name." When Aminata stood to speak, her hands were shaking, and she simply said, "I don't have many words, but I have a heart, and today I only want one thing. I don't need money, I don't need titles. I just want to hear it one more time. Someone call me mother." After the ceremony, Aminata returned to the small village of Kogo, where she had spent half her life living quietly like a shadow, and there, under the old baobab tree, neighbors gathered around a simple meal of red rice, bissap leaf tea, and grilled chicken, not for cameras or news, but for shared memories, proud eyes, and warm laughter. A curious 9-year-old girl named Adama tugged on her hand and asked, "Auntie, why didn't you ever tell me you raised the president?" And Aminata, smiling softly as if sharing a quiet secret, replied, "Because I didn't do it for people to know. I did it because a child needed love, and love doesn't need proof. Not everything needs to be shown off." In a quiet corner of the yard, someone took a photo of the silver-haired woman holding a child gently to her chest, and that image later appeared on the cover of a school textbook in Burkina Faso, in a chapter titled "The Silent Women Who Lifted a Nation with Their Bare Hands." What you've just heard is a true story, but maybe it's also happening around you right now. An elderly woman mopping the hospital hallway, a thin security guard unlocking school gates before dawn, a street sweeper clearing away last night's dust from your neighborhood. Have you ever asked their name?